Today's episode, we are going to be discussing the Calley and Casey, the authors of the book Good Energy, and their interview on the Tucker Carlson. So it's an amazing interview. I suggest you watch it, maybe even buy the book. It's so interesting. I got Dr. Whiting here because I had to bring it up to him because he didn't see it. And he's been talking about some of the same things they talked about in that interview for, 40 years.
Yeah, at least.
At least 40 years. First off, one of the most disturbing thing was Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds had the most money in the 1990s. This is the way they put it. They bought the food making companies and they put the scientists that made cigarettes addictive in charge of making the foods addictive, the processed foods.
Well, that's always been the name of the game, is addiction. And there is what we call legal addiction and illegal addiction. But the end result is dependency. And they wanted to create a food model that people couldn't walk away from.
Couldn't resist it. Man, it's evil on another level. The food pyramid was created also by them, and carbs and sugar at the base of it, or carbs and
sugars and refined carbs, refined grains.
And you've been discussing the food pyramid for 40 years.
I've been telling people ever since the food pyramid came out that it was the most destructive thing nutritional science or dietetics had ever developed. And the reason for that is it is heavily laden with foods that are habit forming, fattening, diabetes causing, heart disease causing nature. And that was its intent. It was an advertising gimmick. It was put out as if it was science, but there is zero science behind it.
And they talk about how they paid off all the people at the top colleges to get that in. Another thing they discussed was seed oils. Seed oils were developed because they were a byproduct of industry and they wanted to find out how to make them profitable. Highly inflammatory seed oils, and they are the things that cause free radical formation and rancidity. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, when you have a seed oil in the seed, we're good because the seed protects it. But when you start extracting these things by the gallons or the boatload, they become easily rancid, and rancidity in oils and fats produce free radicals which damage your DNA structures.
Man. Are there any other oils that create the same problem?
Yes, one of the biggest ones is corn oil.
Okay.
Corn oil can become rancid very easily just by exposing it to air. But when you heat corn oil, like in cooking, you accelerate the rancidity and free radical formation 1,000 times.
Wow, that's just, it's insane. And they talk about high fructose corn syrup, and that it seems, high fructose corn syrup that seems to be in everything. Why is high fructose corn syrup so bad?
Well, because it's loaded with the very forms of sugar that raise insulin levels.
Oh, okay.
And you can take dextrose sugar and fructose sugar will raise insulin levels about 40% faster. And they're putting it in everything.
I see dextrose on a lot of labels.
High fructose corn syrup.
The results of the diet we eat create, this is another thing they talked about, the results of the diet we eat create chronic health conditions which fuel the economy of the health industry. So the food industry and the health industry are working hand in hand to create their own economy.
You bet. And with the decline of cigarette smoking, those invested in those businesses started to want to look for other things.
Yeah.
And food addiction is a science unto its own nature. And if you think the food industry is your friend, they're not. They're only interested in selling, reselling, which means addiction, and preserving, keeping foods on the shelf long enough until they can brainwash people to buy them.
Yeah, I mean, they're loaded with chemicals and...
Yeah.
The condition, this is what also they said, the conditions are managed but never cured by pharmaceuticals. And is it not true that almost all pharmaceuticals require additional drugs to manage the side effect of the pharmaceutical?
Yes, indeed. And remember, the word cure is synonymous with economic disaster.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to cure you of a chronic illness. They want to manage that illness just to keep you alive and just to keep you just happy and healthy enough. But they don't want to cure you because there's no money in cures. For example, type 2 diabetes, one of the most epidemic chronic diseases. It's reversible and technically curable.
Yeah.
But all of the medications that have been produced for that have just the opposite effect. They manage, they do not reverse, and they do not cure.
And 74% of adults are obese from ultra-processed food diets. What will be the eventual outcome of that trend, do you think, as like you've been saying for 40 years?
Oh, diabetes, certain forms of cancer, heart disease, will all continue to rise exponentially. Because at the root of that, one of the main root factors of almost all chronic illnesses is obesity.
Yeah. And so 50% of all adults have diabetes or are pre-diabetic. There are two factors that contribute to this. Can you discuss that part of it?
Yeah, first and foremost, for some people, it's genetic predisposition.
Yeah.
We know that if your parents and grandparents were diabetic, you have a much greater chance of also being that if you abuse your diet. And then, of course, the last one is the big grandpa of all, and that's diet itself. The highly refined, highly processed, highly laden with sugar and sugar-forming foods diet that we all live off of is killing us, and it's doing so at an incredibly rapid rate.
Yeah, and these are all things that Dr. Whiting has been saying for over 40 years. So that's kind of why we wanted to touch on that interview that they did on the Tucker Carlson show. We also have a list of diabetes frequently asked questions that are asked a lot on all platforms. What is the main cause of type 2 diabetes?
Easy. Standard American diet.
That's it.
That food pyramid.
Yeah.
End of story.
And so how does insulin resistance develop, and why does it lead to type 2 diabetes?
Well, in a nutshell, when you consume sugar-forming foods, they become glucose in the blood. In response to that, the body produces a hormone called insulin. Over time, excessive insulin production through this type of diet produces a resistance to insulin from your cells. Then your blood sugar begins to rise.
And some people think that when you drink alcohol, that turns to sugar. Is that true?
That is one of the stupidest things. And you know that one of the largest groups of people who believe that are dietitians.
Yeah.
I mean, they should be ashamed of themselves. Where did they go to school? In a barn? I mean, it's just ridiculous. No, sugar becomes alcohol. Alcohol cannot become sugar because chemical equations can't go both directions.
Yeah.
Alcohol is the result of sugar fermentation. It can't go backwards.
Nice. That's going to be a good one. Why does the current treatment of low blood sugar miss the point completely?
Well, what's happening is they're focusing on blood sugar. Oh, elevated blood sugar, type 2 diabetes.
When they should be focused on insulin.
Insulin levels, exactly. Type 2 diabetes is not a disorder of elevated blood sugar.
Yeah.
It's a disorder of elevated insulin. High blood sugar is the result of the process.
And what role does hyperinsulinemia play in the development of diabetes?
Isn't that an awful word?
That's right.
Well, it is the pre-diabetic state. So when your insulin levels are constantly high, you're on the fast track to type 2 diabetes.
Yeah.
If it's not addressed properly.
And so what role do carbs play in contributing to insulin resistance?
100%.
Oh, okay. And sugar?
Well, yeah. Remember, carbohydrates, it's a big group. Sugars, fruit, grains, refined carbohydrates, and the more refined and concentrated the carbohydrate food is, the more negative impact it will have on insulin resistance.
And so why is it better to focus on fasting and low-carb diets over calorie restriction?
Okay. Let's say you're going to go, because you're overweight, you're pre-diabetic, going on a diet, right? Okay, so on this diet, you're going to go on a calorie diet. You're going to have 1,200 calories a day. 1,200 calories of what? If it's still 1,200 calories, 80% of which is sugar-forming foods, you're still in a hell of a mess. You've got to restrict carbohydrate intake as the foundation, and there are several ways that you can do that.
And is the glycemic index a reliable tool for people with diabetes?
Yes and no. It's better than nothing. What it is really is a point value that's put on various foods as to how fast they will convert in the body to blood sugar or glucose. And so it is helpful. Obviously, eating lower glycemic index foods would be a better choice.
A better choice. And so can a high-fat diet actually benefit diabetics?
Well, it benefits all of us. One of the most horrifying dietary trends comes from back in the mid-'70s, and that was the low-fat diet.
Low-fat, yeah.
That did more harm to people than we still can imagine. Yeah. Your body needs fats for hundreds and thousands of hormones. Insulin is one of them. So I don't know necessarily a high-fat diet, but certainly a diet moderate in healthy fats would be beneficial.
What are the most harmful foods for people with insulin resistance?
The more refined the carbohydrate, the worse they are. So whole grain bread, for example, is better than refined white bread.
Yeah.
Fresh fruit is better than canned fruit.
Yeah. Because
we've got enzymes in there. So the more refined the sugar source, the more deadly and dangerous it becomes.
And how does intermittent fasting help to control insulin resistance?
That's an interesting thing. It's been getting a lot of attention lately. But our ancestors used to intermittent fast and didn't even know about it.
Yeah.
They once, maybe twice a day, but usually only once, because they were too busy. And now we've got nothing but time to snack and eat horrible food all day long. Intermittent fasting is a fantastic tool for stabilizing insulin and blood sugar.
And is fasting for everyone, or are there some people who shouldn't fast?
There's probably some people. I can't right offhand think of all of them, but certainly someone who is more severely hypoglycemic, low blood sugar, would have to be.
That would help
careful.
them get it in check.
Yeah, but it would also have to be controlled fasting because their blood sugar could fall right through the floor.
And so, can fasting be effective for managing diabetes long term, or is it really just a short term solution?
Either one.
Okay.
But certainly, diet modification in the way of some form of fasting. When you need to find out what's right for you, you can do a 6-hour fast, a 12-hour fast, a 24-hour fast, depending upon your chemistry, your lifestyle, and so forth. But any form of fasting, giving the body a rest from the constant influx of sugar-forming foods, is going to be a good thing.
How does stress contribute to insulin resistance, and what can be done about it?
Stress, as I have said for decades, is the cardinal cause or main cause of all illness and disorder in the body. If we only knew what stress does to the chemistry of the body, we'd all be amazed we're still here.
Yeah.
It's really terrible. And because insulin is a hormone and stress affects hormone production in several different ways,
Cortisol and
not
all
a
that.
good thing.
Yeah. And what is the impact of exercise on insulin resistance?
Well, when you're utilizing blood glucose, which you would be doing during exercise and activity, you then lower the demand for insulin in the body, and that over time can help to revitalize your insulin receptor cells so that you don't require as much insulin when in fact it's actually needed.
Yeah, and so why do you, for the last 40 years, advocate for a holistic approach that includes both dietary changes and lifestyle changes?
Well, diabetes, type 2 diabetes now, is the result of poor lifestyle choices.
Yeah.
Period. Yes, there's a genetic predisposition. We talked about that. But that's rare, and even that can be controlled through diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
So, believe me, drugs for diabetes are not going to cure your problem. They're not designed to cure your problem. Diet and lifestyle changes can and are reversing type 2 diabetes every day.